Hi guys, we are going to work on continuing your chess pieces today. I've got some textural emphasis ideas to show you, as well as making some custom pieces for the bishop and the rook and the knight and king and queen, and just throw some ideas at you and see what direction you might want to take it. We have found that the dough wants to slump and slide a little bit. It doesn't want to stay put exactly where you intend it to be. Clay is far more manageable, so we're going to deal with some timing issues as well, with like what's the best appropriate time to deal with texture or moving the material around while it's still soft. So we got a variety of things to show you today. Alright, you might remember some of the tools that we started with previously. I added a couple to that list. Pair of pliers, some wire, and you could find anything as far as wire that might be in your house. And I also found these little eye bolts that I had in the garage, and they're going to offer, again, that kind of skeletal structure behind the piece and underneath the clay or the dough to give it a little bit more stability. And here we go. We've got some pieces of clay in their different stages of drying. I made a variety of little different forms, and some of them have dried out further than others. This little cube, you might recall, it's kind of stiff. It's not nearly as soft as as it was. A little drum form, also kind of stiff. Hershey's Kiss type of a form. This has a little bit more moisture in it, and it is a little bit still soft. This pyramidal type form, which is starting to dry out. In fact, you can kind of see it starting to look kind of chalky and far drier. It's pretty rigid. And then a rounded form. I think I described this as like the body of a seal. And this is still fairly soft. I can manipulate it pretty well. So, one of the things that you guys are learning in class as well as at home now, what to do at each stage. So start off with a nail, and if you're interested in doing some sort of a texture on the piece, you might consider that the stiffer clay accepts texture better once it's not quite so soft. So I might just fill this in with a pattern of little dots and impressions. I'm getting a little crack right there. I'm not going to let it bother me too much. Okay, so that's showing up pretty nicely. This guy, which is a fair bit softer, I might try this screw into the surface of it, and I might kind of roll it down the side and see what happens with that. That's pretty thin and faint. I'm not really seeing that very well. That might be better on like really soft stuff. For instance, the seal type form. Might roll this one. Oh, there it goes. You can see that leaving a pretty good impression in the little bit softer dough. I had picked out a variety of these drill bits to mess around with as well, and just by pressing those in, creating some sort of a pattern that might interest you. What else? Pine needles. I guess I was thinking that because these are kind of sharp, you might be able to draw into the piece, although these are a little stiff to do that very easily. It's not really making much of a mark. Maybe it could be embedded into here, kind of pushing it in. Well, that makes kind of a line, but you might explore that further. I've got a stick, of course, which is a far more rigid surface, and that will certainly leave texture. That kind of edge there is starting to look like fish scales or dragon scales, and maybe if I overlap them, it'll start to look like scales. That's kind of neat. A match head. We found that match heads work particularly well for blending surfaces together and trying to remove cracks or creases just by rubbing it and kind of pushing it back and forth. I think you could do the same sort of a thing with the eraser tip, because it's kind of a nice soft malleable. It has kind of a particular level of firmness to help smooth things out. I think that's going to be particularly nice if you can find something like that. Oh, let's see, this pine cone. Stick that in. Oh, that's cool. I kind of like that gridded pattern. I might try to do that on the whole thing, all the way around. I'm getting a little cracking showing up, but it's not bothering me too much. I like things with texture. Yeah, that's kind of neat. It's subtle right now, but if I go to paint this later, I bet that those creases will show up even more.